All right, let's dive straight in. In the super high-stakes world of private capital, there's a quiet revolution going on. And it's not so much about what they're investing in, it's about how they're doing it. This whole industry that's been running on gut feelings and, spreadsheets is finally being dragged into the digital age, and it is changing absolutely everything. So that brings us to the big question we're going to tackle. I mean, for decades, the spreadsheet was king. It was everything. So why on earth is this massive $2 trillion world suddenly throwing out its favorite toy? The answer? Well, it's a pretty fascinating story about pressure, new tech, and a completely different way of thinking. So here's our game plan for this explainer. First up, we're going to look at the big shakeup that made the old way of doing things pretty much impossible. Then we'll check out the new tech that's stepping in to take its place. We'll learn to talk the talk, the language of startups. We'll get clear on who owns what. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together in a new process that's actually better for everyone.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1, the private capital shakeup. Because, before you can really appreciate the solution, you've got to understand what broke in the first place. And to get that pressure, you have to know who's in the room. It's basically 3 key groups. You've got your limited partners, or LPs. Think of them as the money, big players like pension funds. Then you've got the general partners, or GPs. They're the fund managers, the ones actually making the investment calls. And of course, you have the founders, the entrepreneurs actually out there building these amazing companies. Okay, so here's where the dominoes start to fall. The LPs, the ones with the money, they're getting nervous. They want to see what's going on, so they're demanding way more transparency. That puts a ton of pressure on the GPs, the fund managers, who then have to turn around and get really good, clean data from their founders. See? It's this chain reaction, and it's sending shockwaves through the whole system.
And the big problem? The old way of doing things just couldn't keep up. Those trusty old spreadsheets? Suddenly, everyone realized they were just clunky, cumbersome, slow, and worst of all, just full of potential mistakes. The whole system was starting to crack under the pressure. But you know what happens when things break, right? It creates an opportunity. And that brings us right into Section 2, the modern VC tech stack. This is the cavalry, the new wave of software designed specifically to fix this mess. And listen, this is not a small deal. The market for the software is absolutely exploding. We're talking about a projected $2.5 billion by 2032. So yeah, this isn't some tiny little trend. It's like they're ripping out all the old plumbing of the industry and installing something brand new. So this new tech stack has a tool for pretty much everything. You've got your CRMs to find deals, things like Carta to handle all the back office stuff, and research tools to see what's hot. But the real star of the show, the big game changer, is that stuff in the middle, portfolio management software. This is what finally automates that super painful, mistake-filled process of bugging founders for data. Okay, so the new tools are sucking in all this data automatically. Fantastic. But what do you do with it? That brings us to part 3, learning to speak the language of startups. Because having the data is one thing, understanding what it's trying to tell you is a whole different ballgame. And there are really 2 dialects you need to know. Think of it like this. Financial statements are like looking in the rearview mirror. They tell you where the company has been. They're the history books. But KPIs, key performance indicators, that's like looking at the dashboard and the GPS. They're all about predicting where the company is going. It's the real-time pulse check. When VCs look at those financials, they're zooming in on a few key things. Income statement? They want to see that sweet, sweet recurring revenue. Balance sheet? They're hunting for any red flags. But honestly, the cash flow statement is where the real action is. That's where you find the burn rate and the runway, which is just a fancy way of saying how fast are we burning through cash and how long till we hit zero. Now, here's the super important thing about KPIs. They are absolutely not one size fits all. The metrics you care about totally change depending on the business. If you're a SaaS company, you live and die by things like monthly recurring revenue. But if you're selling stuff online, an e-commerce shop, it's all about how many people buy something and how much they spend. Okay, so we're talking about sharing all this data, which naturally leads to a really important question. Who actually owns what? And who gets to see what? And that's our next section, understanding ownership and rights. This goes way beyond just the numbers. And at the absolute center of all this is something called the capitalization table, or just cap table for short. You have to think of this as the holy grail, the one master document that is the single source of truth for ownership. It tracks every single share, every investor, and it's constantly changing as the company gets bigger.
The cap table is also where you see this concept called dilution play out. It sounds scary, right? Basically, when a new investor comes in and gets new shares, your piece of the pie gets a little smaller, percentage-wise. But, and this is the key, if that new investment makes the whole pie way bigger, your smaller slice can end up being worth a lot more than your old, bigger slice was.
So, how do investors make sure they can keep an eye on their slice of the pie? Through legal rights. They're called information and inspection rights. And they're not just suggestions, they are legally binding. They guarantee investors can get the data they need. It's what makes transparency official, and it's really the bedrock of trust between a founder and their investors.
All right, let's tie this all together. Our final section, the new win-win workflow. This is where we see it all click into place. The tech, the metrics, the legal rights, and how it creates a system that's actually better for everybody. So this new workflow is pretty straightforward, really. 5 steps. Step 1, you set up one system for everything. No more spreadsheets flying around. 2, you agree on what metrics actually matter. 3, you automate the heck out of collecting that data. 4, you analyze it and see what's really going on. And 5, you use that clean, clear data to talk to everybody. And here's the beautiful part, the big payoff. For founders, it's a huge relief. They spend less time filling out reports and more time actually building the company. For the GPs, the investors, they get better data faster, which means they can make smarter decisions. And for the LPs, the people who provided the money in the first place, they get the transparency they wanted, which builds a ton of trust. It really is a win-win-win. So when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway? It's pretty simple. Moving away from spreadsheets to this modern, tech-first way of doing things, it's not optional anymore. It's not a nice-to-have. It is the new price of admission for being successful in this world. And that kind of leaves us with a final question to chew on, right? In a world that has just obsessed with data, you've got to ask, maybe this kind of transparency, powered by technology, isn't just a good idea. Maybe it's the ultimate competitive edge. Something to think about.